Mystic God, I beckon you. During a time when the religious God is not enough to console the fears and tears of despair of the unknown. Reality is, we were always existing in the unknown, false control of what we believe to know. These days, there are days where our faith wavered or failed to exist because we relied on religious figures to get us through the veil of our tales of how we got over, of how change was going to come, of how joy will come in the morning. Well, it's morning. And we are mourning lives that are being poured back into an earth that we aren't sure will reap the seed we've sowed. And we've been told, this is where your glory reside. And now we cannot hide even in the shelter of our home, of our heart, of our mind, always knowing our whereabouts. Even when we're about to lose all certainty in you, you show and prove you're still in the midst of being this mystic being that is simply being. Dear beings, you were created to be. Fear is often a plea to see your discomforts and suffering and place them as faults into a vault of false narrative. Subconscious daydream, elusive realities like religion, a cavity, mold over so one can take a bite out of life and you've bitten more than you can chew. Yet still there are a few who will choose to be. So many aim to be like me, but I am, and you are. So be, even in your grief, mystic being. Ashe, Ago, Amin, Amen. Shalom. Peace.
Welcome to Theology Talk, you like or not. I am your creator, curator, investigator, sometime instigator, but definitely a liberator, Rev to say. And for a few moments of your sacred time in this sacred space, I invite you to tune in as we talk good, talk back, talk loud, talk smack, talk life and love, talk true, talk music, talk art, talk faith, hope, peace, joy, talk justice, talk God. Let's talk.
You call me out upon the waters, the great unknown, where feet may fail. And there I find you in the mystery, an ocean steep, my faith will stand, and I will call upon your name, and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul rests in your embrace. For I am yours, and you are mine. Your grace abounds in deepest waters. Your sovereign heart will be my guide. Your feet may fail when fear surrounds me. You've never failed, and you won't start now. So I will call upon your name, and keep my eyes above the waves. When oceans rise, my soul rests in your embrace. For I am Let me walk upon your waters, wherever you would call me. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. Spirit, lead me where my trust is without borders. Let me walk upon the waters, wherever you would call me. Take me deeper than my feet could ever wander, and my faith will be made stronger in the presence of my Savior. And I will call upon your name and keep my eyes above the waves. My soul rests in your embrace. I am yours, and you are mine.
Dear God, we thank you for having us. We thank you for bringing us together. We thank you for this time. Although in some ways, many ways, it hurts to be apart physically. It hurts to see people you know and love and not be able to hug them, but it also hurts to hear that people you know have been touched by what's happening right now. Some have even passed away. That hurts. We feel it. To lose one is to lose all of humanity. And we want to acknowledge those who have passed and are sick and fighting right now. And we want to just ask you to be with them, ask you to comfort the families who are grieving right now. Pray that you would be with the elders in this time who are feeling lonely and afraid. I pray that you would be with everybody who is feeling lonely and afraid. Everybody who feels fear, I pray that you would be with them. And I pray that during this time people will feel encouraged. I pray that during this time people will feel your presence, and that we would come to know the true meaning of be still and know that I am God. That we would come to know the true meaning of wanting for our brothers or sisters what we want for ourselves. That we would come to know the true meaning of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That we would come to know true forgiveness in this space. That we would come to discover true joy, inspiration, and not feel the need to be producing like a machine, but to know that it is okay to be still and be grateful. during this time. It is my intention to be a vessel. I ask that you would use me. Please use me during this time, that somebody would feel your presence, and somebody would feel whole again, and that somebody would feel joy, that they would smile, think about their neighbors, and just sit still in this moment. So let it be.
Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing.
Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Years ago, I heard an old preacher say, "There is more hidden than seen. Proceed with caution." There is more hidden than seen. Proceed with caution. When I think about this verse and all of the violence that was going on that dark day, where Jesus was being cursed, was being mocked, was being ridiculed, and yet Jesus said, "Father, forgive them because they don't know what they're doing." They have no idea what they are doing. I think that a lot of what was happening on that day was such a mystery. Jesus was being crucified. It was violent. They were suffering. That is sure. But behind the scenes, behind the fold of this reality, there was so much more going on that was unseen. And so people who thought they knew what they were doing or thought they were doing something good didn't know what they were doing. They had no idea what they were doing. So much is a mystery. Even today, we don't often know what we are doing. One of the great mysteries of life is that we often think we're on the right side of something until we are shocked to find out that we were on the wrong side. One of the great mysteries of life is that we often think we know exactly what's going on, and we miss so much. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. One of the great mystics, Richard Rohr, has a wonderful piece in this book, What the Mystics Know, talking about darkness. And as we know, one of the things that happened, the text tells us that there was darkness during the daytime once Jesus died. And that darkness, I think one of the things that was going on was that darkness was also symbolic of humanity. It was symbolic of what is even in each of us. Richard Rohr says, "The problem is precisely in the need to be right and the need to think of myself as right. That is the problem for the soul. I have to do my work and leave the judgment to God. I need to avoid the compulsion to constantly pass judgment, because those who constantly pass judgment are not in a position to honestly perceive their own reality." I could read that again and again. Naturally, we have to learn to distinguish between darkness and light, but we dare not succumb to the illusion that we ourselves don't have a share in the darkness. The darkness we see is always a part of us. We can't naively skip over the subject of darkness and light. And it's precisely because we were so naive that we so often become victims of dark powers and call them light. I tell people who want to be prophets, you can't play the prophet until you have discovered in yourself what you accuse of others. The darkness in each one of us is so very real. Father, forgive them. Father, forgive us, for we don't know what we are doing. We don't know what we are doing. There is so much more hidden than there is seen. There's so much more going on behind the folds of the universe that we have perhaps tapped into a little bit. Father, forgive us, for we do not know what we do. May we recognize the darkness in ourselves. And then, as another great mystic said, Maya Angelou, may she rest in power, she said, when we know better, we will do better. Amen and Ashe.
So let it be. I need thee, oh, I need thee every hour. I need thee. Oh, bless me now, my Savior. I
tell you the truth, today you will be with me in paradise.
to thee.
Jesus at this part of him walking and being about to be crucified is that he is on the cross. On the left and the right are two criminals that are on the cross next to him. But what also is happening is noise interference. Let me give you the definition of noise interference. Noise interference is when there's a disruption between the speaker and the audience. Noise interference is when you can no longer hear what someone is saying, when you can no longer listen to what you need to listen to because there's too much noise around you. Not only is there Jesus on the cross and the two criminals beside him that are also on the cross, one on the left and one on the right, but what also is happening is what's going on, the noise going on in the ground. You see, at this moment, the leaders are looking up at Jesus and they're mocking him. They're saying, Jesus, if you are the Messiah, if you are the chosen one, get yourself off this cross. Why don't you save yourself? Why are you still in the same place where we want you? They're creating so much noise. This noise goes from the leaders to the soldiers, and the soldiers begin to taunt Jesus. You see that baton, that noise baton is being passed. The soldiers begin to taunt Jesus and say, listen, if you are the chosen one, if you are the King of the Jews, get yourself out of this situation. Save yourself. So now the noise has gone from the leaders to the soldiers, and now the noise has hit one of the criminals that is hanging on the cross next to Jesus. So that criminal turns to Jesus and says, yes, if you are the Messiah, save yourself. And while you're saving yourself, save us. Save us. So right now there's a noise interference happening because noise is bubbling over, but something miraculous happens. In this moment, the criminal on the other side of Jesus begins to rebuke all of this noise. His name is Dismas. Dismas says to the other criminal, aren't you afraid of God because you're in the same condemnation that he is in? You're in the same situation that Jesus is in, but you see, Jesus doesn't belong here because he's innocent. But we deserve to be in this place because of the deeds we have done in life. The amazing thing about this is that Dismas, even though he's on the cross and he hears all of this noise, he's rising above, his faith is rising above the noise interference. The noise interference isn't getting to his faith because he's still talking to Jesus. The noise interference isn't getting to his faith because he's still recognizing the power of Jesus. The noise interference isn't getting to who he is and who he wants to be, because then he turns to Jesus and says, when you get to your kingdom, not kingdom, but kingdom, when you get to your kingdom, don't forget about me. And Jesus turns to Dismas and says, you will be with me in paradise. The amazing, ultimate, glorious thing about this is that even though Dismas, this criminal, is in pain, even though he's on the cross just like Jesus, he is near his death, he is suffering. He's not allowing the noise interference of his suffering, the noise interference of his pain to block him from talking to Jesus. See, right now we're in a moment in life where we are surrounded by noise. That noise is interfering with us talking to our promise. Noise is interfering with us talking to our destiny. Noise is interfering with us talking to our families. Noise is interfering with us talking to our hopes, our dreams. There has to come a time when your faith rises above the noise. The reason why Jesus looked at Dismas and said, you will be with me in paradise, because Dismas was able to cut through the noise and go right to what he knows to be true. Sometimes the noise makes us think our faith is false. The noise that's happening right now, allow your faith to rise above the noise. Stop speaking to the lack. Stop allowing the lack, the noise of the lack, to interfere with your abundance. Stop allowing the noise of hopelessness to interfere with your hope. Allow your faith to rise above the noise. So in this moment, right now, you can be in paradise. You can speak to your paradise. You can be one with your paradise, whatever that may look like for you, whether that is peace, whether that is understanding that this too shall pass, but so the noise doesn't interfere with what you're listening to, which is the voice of your higher power, and who you're connected to, which is your destiny.
We need the air. We need every hour. We need thee. Oh, bless us now. Oh, Savior. Oh, I go
Here is your son, and to disciple, here is your mother.
to thee.
Last week, I was part of a queer theology discussion group organized by a friend of mine on Zoom. Our prompt for the discussion was, what has been the biggest shift in your theology? I shared that mine was rediscovering the humanity of Jesus. Let me explain. I grew up with a religious education that emphasized Jesus' divinity very heavily. There was lots of focus on the miracle stories or on the biblical prophecies that foretold the coming of Jesus. And, of course, major emphasis on the triumphant, risen Christ who will come again in glory. It's not that my parish or my theology teachers didn't want to talk about the humanity of Jesus at all, but more so that it was sort of an inconvenient truth for them. Yes, they'd say, Jesus was human. Yes, he experienced joy and anger and sadness like us. But he overcame death. He rose again. Good Friday reminds us that in order to get to that moment of glory, Jesus had to die. And for me, nowhere is Jesus more human than in his death. Like us, Jesus was afraid to die, and he asked his Father if this cup could pass from him. He died a very painful death, terrified, deserted by his friends, and mocked by his people. My God, why have you forsaken me? These last words of Jesus are so profoundly relatable to our own lives. In our darkest hours, we have all turned our gaze toward heaven and wondered, where are you, God? Why won't you help me? Why won't you save me? Moments of crisis and utter panic like these often serve as bits of revelation. For me, reading these words, I am reminded that Jesus was not only human like us, he went through the darkest aspects of the human experience. We are told that chaos overtook Jerusalem when Jesus died, that the curtain of the temple was torn in two from top to bottom, the earth shook and the rocks were split, the tombs were opened, and the bodies of the saints who had died were raised. And in all that chaos, the onlookers say to each other, truly, this man was God's son. In his book on climate change, entitled We Are the Weather, writer Jonathan Safran Foer tells us that, quote, encoded in our language is the understanding that disasters tend to expose that which was previously hidden, end quote. He goes on to say that the word apocalypse comes from an ancient Greek word meaning to reveal, and emergency comes from a Latin word meaning to arise or bring to light. Crisis lays bare the things that we may have not seen before or perhaps chose to ignore. The coronavirus pandemic is no different. It is exposing many faults in our way of life. Well before we were all quarantined at home, people were living paycheck to paycheck. Before coronavirus, our healthcare system was neglected and millions had no health insurance or access to care. Well before this crisis, homeless and incarcerated folks were forgotten by the rest of society. And prior to being sequestered in our homes indefinitely, we had an epidemic of loneliness, made worse by an individualistic culture that tells us we alone are responsible for our success in life. All these things are being revealed to us now, and we must make a decision. Will we build solutions to this crisis that make for better lives for all people in the future? Or will we try to desperately go back to normal? We should also pay attention to what is being revealed in our own inner lives. What fears are coming to the surface for you in all of this? Fear of death, fear of losing control, fear of your neighbors. Only in paying attention to what is revealed, however painful or uncomfortable it may be, can we hope to move forward and, like Jesus, rise again. Amen.
We need you. Oh, we need you. Wherever we need you. Oh, bless us now. Oh, Savior. We come to thee.
God, my God, why have you forsaken me?
1707, English minister Isaac Watts composed one of the most famous and beloved hymns in church history, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross. The well-known lyrics voice a traditional devotion in Christian history, that of gazing upon the cross. For instance, a contemporary devotion says this: Are you in need of a Savior today? Gaze upon the cross. Are you in the valley of trouble? Gaze upon the cross. Are you looking for direction? Gaze upon the cross. Gaze upon the cross our amazing God has given us in the heavens to remind us that his cross covered it all. So keep your eyes up, sisters. Gaze upon the cross. Well, the first persons to truly gaze upon the cross, as recorded in the Gospel of John, were three women. Mary of Nazareth, Jesus' mother, her sister, and Jesus' aunt, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene, who the history suggests was one of Jesus' closest companions. I strongly doubt that as they looked up, gazing upon the cross, that they were thinking of how wondrous it was. They probably weren't thanking God for this amazing sign of grace, love, and triumph. What they were seeing was almost unspeakable horror. In agonizing helplessness, they were witnessing a deeply loved son and friend die a brutal and unjust death, his broken body bleeding and gasping for breath. I'm sure they wanted to look away, probably to run away, but they had to gaze at the scene. They knew that they had to look deeply into the very heart of darkness, of the evil that all humans are capable of. There was a truth there, and they desperately needed to know it. In 1955, Mamie Till had to travel from Chicago to Mississippi to claim the body of her slain 14-year-old son, Emmett. She recounted the horrific experience of seeing his body loaded, mangled, one eye gouged out. And in a decision that would change this nation, she decided that the casket at his service would be open. She knew that America had to gaze upon the victim of this atrocity. Now, true, it was her murdered son, but she knew that Emmett, along with millions of others over the centuries, was the victim of a violent, oppressive system. Not unlike Jesus, his death was the deliberate product of a system that sought to destroy and dehumanize, and any possibility of liberation required, demanded that we gaze at the truth. Jesus had known all along that the radical declaration of the reign of God in the face of empire would cost his life. I didn't think in those moments when he prayed in agony for the cup to pass, it wasn't just for himself, but for his followers, who he knew would be traumatized and crushed with despair. And he had tried to prepare them all along. He constantly invited them to grasp the deep mystery of the reign of God beyond all religious formulas and moral codes. The poor and mourning would be blessed. The prisoner and homeless would be God's precious ones. The call to an unrelenting forgiveness in a world of evil. It was not simply a matter of discipleship. It was a spiritual path that required going deeper, beyond the bounds of our knowledge and understanding. Jesus was inviting them truly to a contemplative, even mystical journey. Because these three loving women had grasped something of this very mystery, they had the courage to gaze at the spectacle of public terrorism. This was a mystical moment, not a serene form of quiet mysticism, but one that happens in unspeakable pain, one that yields to a deeper truth in this very place of horror. True mysticism grasps both beauty and terror. And then, Jesus' simple words at that moment: mother, your son, son, your mother. In the very moment when the powers of injustice and oppression are proclaiming their victory, he calls us to reconnect with each other, form new bonds, reweave kinship and community, build home space, hospitality, defy the powers by courageous acts of human connection. It's the greatest commandment. Love one another. At the very moment of terror, in the face of all that would seek to destroy us, Jesus invites us to know this freeing truth. And the deepest knowing, the mystical knowing, is ultimately in the doing. To be the beloved community. After her son's murder, Mamie Till was a lifelong activist speaking out against the violence of segregation. She also developed programs for low-income children, children in poverty in the inner city, including programs of education and creative arts. She had lost her child, but became mother to countless other children. She refused to let violence have the last word. She would nurture hope and life. Out of her grief, she planted seeds of beloved community, which is what Jesus on the cross was asking us to do. This is a truth that sets us free. It's a love born of a contemplative gaze at the world in its beauty and terror. It asserts love in the face of death. and it enlightens the way on our common journey home. And that may in the end be truly wondrous.
What will be his last breaths? Jesus musters up the strength to grim his teeth as the pain of cracked ribs and wounded limbs cause a disruptive agony in his body. He wincingly whispers out, "I thirst," as he looks out upon the crowd that has mocked, ridiculed, and was actively persecuting him. He searches for just one face who would help to ease his intensifying need for something to drink. One of those in attendance places a sponge on the stem of a hyssop plant and soaks it in vinegar or sour wine. I can imagine Jesus eagerly anticipating some semblance of relief as the sponge drew closer and closer to his mouth. The acidic and tart liquid probably burning his dry and sunburned lips after having spent hours under the blistering sun. This moment and this encounter, all in fulfillment of the prophecy as recorded in the book of Psalms. It was in this moment that Jesus knew that he had accomplished all he had set out to do. His God-given purpose had been fulfilled, and now it was time to move on to the next part of his journey. On this Good Friday, we commemorate what is perceived to be the ultimate and greatest sacrifice one could make, the giving of their life in exchange for another. When considering this model that Jesus offers, I can't help but to think of those who are currently on the front lines treating patients suffering in the midst of this pandemic that we are experiencing as a nation and as a global community. While many are confined to their homes by state and county stay-at-home orders, these individuals must continue to show up, must continue to do the work they've been called to do, even at a price. Even though hospitals are inundated with affected patients and concerned family members, healthcare workers continue to answer the call. And I can imagine that even in these times, there are those who understand the dire sense of need Jesus felt when he mumbled, "I thirst." As masks begin to run low, I can't help but hear staff crying out, "I thirst." As personal protection equipment becomes a scarce commodity, I can't help but hear, "I thirst." As patients are isolated in the rooms, unable to have visitors, I can't help but hear, "I thirst." As parents and children struggle together to tackle online learning, I thirst. As students who were forced off campuses with nowhere to go, I thirst. As companies continue closing their doors and laying off employees, I thirst. I thirst. As we as a nation suffer such a pandemic, can you hear? I thirst. I have a need that's not being met. I'm suffering. I don't know what to do. I don't know where my next is coming from, my next check, my next meal, my next job. I thirst. In this global pandemic where we are physically separated from our communities and possibly our sacred spaces, many of us have proclaimed our thirst. Today I ask, what are you thirsty for? What is it that you are standing up in the need standing in the need of in this moment. I'd like to offer that sometimes the things we experience and go through are independent of our own actions. Just as modeled in this text, it is our preparation for us to fulfill our purposes and reach our destiny. The thirst that Jesus experienced was one that was written prior to his coming to earth. Yet and still he continued to show up. So in your moment of need, in your moment of thirst, what are you thirsty for? Where are you showing up? What needs can you meet that those in your community might have? And in this moment, I ask for you to just simply listen, to hear those who may be around you that are crying out, I thirst.
Oh, we need each other now. Oh, we need each other now. Oh, we need each other now. Do you see? I need you, and you need me. Oh, we need each other now. Oh, we need each other now. Oh, we need each other now. I need you.
Finished.
You need me. We need each other now.
"It is finished," he said, and then he died. Another life discarded by empire, deemed disposable, and then empire tried to wash its hands of it all. With social distancing right now, I'm not driving my kids hardly anywhere, but I used to. My kids are young, they're 6 and 4. And my daughter would ask me, "Mommy, why is that man standing on the corner? What does his sign say?" And I would take a breath and explain that there are people who don't have a place to live or enough food to eat, knowing that her next question is, "But Mommy, why? Why is it that there are people who don't have a place to live or enough food to eat?" My son would ask me, "Mommy, why do people live in churches?" referring to undocumented families who have taken sanctuary in order to keep their families together. "Mommy, why isn't everyone safe with the police? Mommy, why do people always want to trade their brown eyes for my blue eyes?" This is the very design of a capitalist white supremacist society, to ensure as much as possible that enough is not accessible to all, to surround us with the lie that we are all disposable. Their questions point me inward. Were all these white supremacist values the ones that value productivity over well-being, time over relationships, white and light skin over darker shades, independence over interdependence? All those lie within. Which part of this invasive plant can I uproot so it no longer chokes the humanity right out of me? Do I allow myself time to be curious with these questions? For if I shine the light on these things within with judgment, I might, in my haste, just pull off the tops. Curiosity might let me see just how deep the roots are and find the support and accountability I need to continue the process of being curious and uprooting. They also point me outward to engage my community and the systems that are also invaded by white supremacy. How do we see the present and imagine a future with liberation and resistance? Right now, all of our present is vastly impacted by COVID-19. How do we live with all of the unknowns? How do we care for ourselves and for our communities? Who are we becoming in the midst of this? I experienced some deep grief over this past year, and I knew that it was changing me and shaping me in ways that I could not fully see. But in the midst of it, I had a vision. One day as I was driving and the rest of my family was sleeping, I had this image that I was breathing through contractions, months and months of contractions as I was giving birth to myself. I was both the parent giving birth and also the one being born. I was spent from all the labor and hoping and fearing for the world that would hold the me I was becoming. Do you feel like you're laboring these days? Do you have support with you, hands to squeeze in the hardest moments, or being the hand to hold for someone else? Do you feel like you're going to make it through this, or like this next contraction might just do you in? In all of this, what is laid bare is that empire is disposable, and only empire is disposable, though it fights tooth and nail. While many things empire was willing to discard are now acknowledged as essential and indisposable, including people. Let's name what is finished today as a practice of resistance and liberation. If it is empire that is finished, in my fear of the unknown, I must be resolute that I am not longing for its resurrection. What do we shake off and say, good riddance? What takes work, support, and accountability to let go of? Name it. Say it out loud. I am not disposable, and neither are you. How am I living in a way that says so? How are we living resistance and liberation, living self-care, community care, and interdependence? It feels like a tall order when we may be running on fumes in this crisis. So one thing at a time. Know that it is also enough to focus on your breath and the ground and community that holds you. Breathe through this contraction. Squeeze the hand that's next to you. None of us are disposable, and we are all becoming.
Father, into your hands I commit my spirit.
For the past couple of weeks during this pandemic surrounding the coronavirus, there have been many news headlines. And while checking these news headlines, there were similar headlines that repeatedly stuck out to me. For instance, breaking news. There aren't enough ventilators to cope with the coronavirus. The United States and other countries face a critical shortage of the life-saving machines. Breaking news. The U.S. tried to build a new fleet of ventilators, but the mission failed. Breaking news. The occupant number 45 says that America's ventilator shortage was unforeseen. Breaking news. Federal agencies warned of ventilator shortages for nearly 2 decades. Breaking news. Who gets a ventilator? Hospitals facing coronavirus surge are preparing for life or death decisions. Here it is. Beloved, Jesus is hanging on the cross. My grandmama would say from the 6th to the 9th hour. And Jesus was hanging there facing what many might have called a life or death decision. And he cried out, "Father, into thy hands I entrust my spirit." And the Bible records that afterwards he took his last breath. I'll paint the picture a little bit more vividly. Seemingly a life or death decision. Because multiple times while hanging there, the story records that Jesus was confronted with others saying, "If you are the Messiah, why don't you just save yourselves?" And if I can use my spiritual imagination here, I can imagine the feeling where leaders who have it in their power to do what is right instead chooses to wash their hands of life or death situations. And not just wash their hands of a particular situation, but afterwards turn a people or someone over to the death-dealing hands of an empire. The empire that breathes at a 100% oxygen level by making sure that many, like black or brown, poor and differently abled, queer and trans folk, can't breathe. The empire. We know all too well of its suffocating systems that only produce death, like racism, classism, and sexism, only producing death like homophobia, transphobia, xenophobia. This system, the system of the empire that would be using a border to cage humans, an injustice system, a system that has a warped economy that is waging the gap further and further between the poor and the rich, a system that has a neglected and biased educational system. The empire, one that gentrifies housing communities. The empire, one that would elect corrupt, detached, money-hungry, and unbothered leadership. You know this system, the empire, a system designed to care for the health of the rich and famous before anyone else. The empire that would have a healthcare system making decisions during a pandemic on who's worthy on living or not. Imagine now Jesus, who's been given over into the state or empire's hand by the washing of Pontius Pilate. Jesus now finds himself hanging there, crucified, low on oxygen, struggling to breathe, and might I add, desperately in need of a ventilator. Jesus, now in the face of the empire, shows them just how much he refuses their system, chooses to verbally sign what I would call a spiritual DNR, and with his very last breath, totally surrenders and cries with a loud voice, "Father, I'd rather be in your hands." Here, beloved, ventilators not only stand for breath, but other necessities we need in life that ought to be available to everyone. But the empire unjustly controls for the sake of a select few. Might I add that when you find, not if, but when you find yourself in need of a ventilator or suffocating by the grips of the empire, don't be surprised, beloved, if it yells, "Pull yourself up by your bootstraps and save yourselves." For when Jesus heard this, he did not fight to continue to breathe in the current system. Jesus, might I say, surrendered himself to be in union with God, knowing the truth, that is, that what the state or the empire think is the end or the ultimate actually is an opportunity for a new beginning. And when you find yourself in the hands of the worst humanity has to offer, best illustrated when humanity's hands are complicit in the death dealings of the empire. Beloved, that is the time to cling like never before to the divine. Perhaps our greatest power then lies not in continuing to fight to be a part of the death-dealing empire, but our true power is surrendering our very breath into the hands of the one that can bring us safely to life on the other side. For truly, beloved, on the other side of hate is love. On the other side of exclusivity is inclusivity. On the other side of scarcity or lack is enough or abundance. On the other side of empire is a revolution. On the other side of injustice is justice. And on the other side of death is life. And you might be asking, how do I know that there is another side? And I'll leave you with the words of the one who told me, beloved, in this world you will have trouble. But fear not, because I have overcome the world. Peace be unto you, Ashe and Amen.
Thank you for viewing this special TTYL or Not production, Mystic Friday. If you've been touched by any way, I encourage you to give to support this platform. Special shout out to Knox Marcel for the voiceover and the trumpet serenade played by Aaron. To all my esteemed guests and speakers, thank you for saying yes. Happy birthday, Dad. Peace, be safe, be blessed.
Thank you.